the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The World of Nasrudin by Idries Shah. Acknowledgement. The author wishes to express his sincere gratitude to those who have assisted in the preparation of The World of Nasrudin. A better beard than yours. "All true devotees wear a beard," said the imam to his audience. "Show me a thick and lustrous beard, and I'll show you a true believer." "My goat has a beard far bushier and longer than yours," replied Nasrudin. "Does that mean he is a better Muslim than you?" A certain clientele. "I have just had an extraordinary dream," Nasrudin told his wife one morning. "I dreamt that I met a merchant with 4 separate loads." "What did he have in his saddlebags?" "In the first he had persecution, and in the second fear, in the third intolerance, and in the fourth blindness." "And who were his clients?" asked his wife, intrigued. "Oppressors, tyrants, imams, and magistrates." A cobbler with wings. When the imam saw Nasrudin's scuffed and torn slippers, he patted him kindly on the arm. "Do not despair, Mullah. The Quran tells us that he who is needy in this world will be rewarded in paradise. Your shoes may be worn and holed here, but you shall wear only the best in heaven." "In that case," replied Nasrudin, "I will certainly be a cobbler in heaven." A gift from God. Nasrudin was out walking when a bee stung him on the nose. The wound began to swell alarmingly, and he hurried off to see the doctor. As he crossed the bazaar, a wag pointed and laughed. "Where did you get that nose? From a donkey?" "Yes," replied the mullah. "When God divided the ass, he gave you the brains and me the nose." A gift from Tamilan. To celebrate his birthday, Tamilan presented each of his courtiers with a large box. As the advisors and nobility opened their presents, they found robes stitched with golden thread and set with precious gems. But when Nasrudin, who had recently fallen from royal favor, unwrapped his gift, he found an old donkey blanket inside. "Merciful Allah," he cried, "witness the generosity of Tamilan, who has honored his servant with the coat off his own back." A happy childhood. While Nasrudin's neighbor was off trading in a faraway land, he asked the mullah to look after his 3-story house. Some days later, a strange family moved in and claimed the property as their own. Nasrudin took them to court. "How can you be sure the house belongs to your neighbor?" asked the judge. "Your Honor, I have known the house since childhood, when it was a tiny hut. Think of all the care and attention my neighbor gave for it to grow up to be such a property." A humble target. In Nasrudin's village there lived several delinquent young lads. One day the mullah was passing a gang of these youths when their leader threw a stone at his donkey. Instead of punishing the boy, Nasrudin called him over and gave him a meat pie. "What's this?" sneered the youth, snatching and devouring the pie. "Are you trying to tame me with kindness?" "Nothing of the sort," replied the mullah. "I was simply making up for the fact that you only had my humble donkey as a target. A mischief maker of your caliber deserves a far nobler mark." Wishing to show off in front of his friends, the lad looked about for a more elaborate target. At that moment, the mayor rode by on an elegant stallion. At once, the lad picked up the biggest rock he could find and hurled it at the horse, which shied and threw its eminent rider. The irate mayor immediately summoned his bodyguards to take the young ruffian away and give him a sound beating. A loaf for the head. Nasrudin arrived at his brother's house late one night and was immediately shown to the best room. Although he was given the most comfortable bed in the house, with the softest sheets and blankets, no one thought to ask if he had eaten. Tossing and turning, Nasrudin struggled in vain to suppress the rumbles of hunger. Finally, he leapt out of bed and called out to his host. "What is the matter?" asked the mullah's brother, alarmed at having been woken in the middle of the night. "The pillows are too soft," replied Nasrudin. "Perhaps I could take a loaf from the kitchen and rest my head on that instead." A matter of opinion. A neighbour's herd of goats got into Nasrudin's garden and hungrily began to devour every bit of vegetation in sight. "Hurry!" howled Nasrudin's wife. "Chase those animals away. They are the greediest creatures in the world and will leave us with nothing." "Wait a minute," replied the mullah, seeing the local imam coming up the path. "The greediest of all creatures has not yet arrived." A matter of weight. Nasrudin had been appointed as the town's judge. 2 men came to him with a civil dispute. Some years previously they had bought a donkey. The richer of the 2 had paid 10 gold pieces, the poorer man only 5. They had then set up a business collecting firewood which they sold door to door. The man who had invested 10 gold pieces in the donkey took a double share of the profits. One day, as they were returning from a town in the mountains, the animal lost its footing and fell over a cliff. "I paid twice as much for the donkey," the first owner told Nasrudin, "and am therefore entitled to some of my money back." "I will not give him a penny," said the second man. "For several years he has taken twice as much of the profit as I." "When the donkey fell, was it carrying a load?" asked the judge. "No, we were returning from a day's work, having sold the wood." "Then it is quite clear," replied Nasrudin. "The donkey's fall was directly related to its weight. Therefore, the man who owned the larger share of its body weight was most responsible for its fall." He then ordered the first man to pay the second 5 gold pieces. Perfect copy. Nasrudin was in Turkey visiting a friend. One night, the 2 men sat outside under the stars. Soon the mullah stopped talking and started making noises of approval. "Why do you ooh and ah?" "I was just admiring your sky and wondering at the mastery of your sky painters. They have made a perfect copy of the stars we have back home." A pious man. One day, an imam called the people of Nasrudin's village together and delivered a sermon on the great deeds of the prophets. As he described the particularly noble achievements of one of these great men, Nasrudin suddenly burst into tears. "Look at this pious man," thundered the imam. "He is so moved that he weeps." "It's true," sobbed the mullah. "You do reduce me to tears. My favourite goat died this morning, and I miss him terribly. When you shake your head as you talk, your beard reminds me of my dead goat, and I am moved to tears." A question of nature. One day, the Shah of Iran summoned the greatest thinkers and philosophers of the land to answer a riddle. Which came first, the river or the boat? "The boat, Your Majesty," said one, "for when it was invented, man realized that it could not sail on dry land and had to invent water." Nasrudin, who happened to be visiting the Shah's court, begged leave to ask a second question. If fish swim all day, what do they do at night? Try as they might, none of the philosophers and sages could find a convincing answer, and Nasrudin finally offered an explanation. After a hard day's swimming, the fish are tired, so they climb up into the trees and fall asleep. "Ridiculous!" clamoured the wise men. "Why so?" asked Nasrudin. "Do you think that fish are cattle, that they cannot climb trees?" A question of timing. Nasrudin was summoned by the king to advise him on medical matters. "Tell me," he asked, "at what hour is it wisest to dine?" Nasrudin thought for a moment. "That all depends on who you are," he said at last. "If you are the king, then any time is a good time to dine. If you are a pauper, you eat when you find food." A supper of O and Ah. Nasrudin had no money and was forced to take temporary employment as a cook. "Listen, mullah," said the gatekeeper on his second day. "Our master is renowned for never paying his servants. Rest assured that the day you ask for your wages, he will set you an impossible task and refuse to pay you when you fail to carry it out." Sure enough, the miserly employer withheld Nasrudin's wages for several weeks. Finally, the cook had no choice but to ask his master for the money. "I will gladly give you your salary," said the miser when Nasrudin approached him. "But first you must cook me a special meal." "And what is this meal to consist of?" "For starters, it should consist of O, and for the main course it should consist of Ah," replied the miser with a smile. "If you fail to bring me such a meal, I will have no choice but to dismiss you and send you on your way without a penny." Nasrudin bowed low and went straight to the kitchen. Some hours later he emerged and announced that dinner was served. When the miser saw a huge bowl of soup on the table, he was delighted. Not only had Nasrudin cooked a savoury meal, but he was about to save several weeks' wages. Taking a large spoonful, he swallowed. "Oh!" he gasped as the chilies burnt his throat. Spluttering and choking, he extended his arm to the cook, who, in turn, offered him a glass of iced water. "Ah!" he wept as the cool liquid doused the flames in his mouth. Away with words. A gang of burglars, awaiting trial, were worried by the severe sentences being handed out in court. "We need a man to represent us so eloquently that no judge could convict us," said their leader. Remembering Nasrudin's way with words, he engaged him as their lawyer. The mullah appeared in court the next day and delivered a defense so convincing that all in the courthouse were sure that the men were innocent. Nasrudin had put so much energy into his performance that he started to sweat. Seconds before the judge ordered the release of the defendants, their counsel could stand the heat no longer. Removing his coat, he asked the guards to lock it in a cell. "Why do you want your coat locked up?" asked the judge. "If these men are to be set free," replied the mullah, "I want to make sure my coat is in a safe place." A weaker man. Walking past an elegant mansion in the heart of the city of Baghdad, Nasrudin heard a party in progress inside. Enticed by the smell of roast goat, he slipped past the guards into the house and took his place at the table. After the feast, his host called for silence. "Friends," he declared, "I have asked you here to celebrate my latest great victories. As you know, I have been the champion wrestler of this city for some time, but having annihilated the competition throughout the land, I am now champion of the entire country." The diners started to cheer their host. Only Nasrudin remained silent. This infuriated the wrestler. "Are you not impressed that I have pulverized my enemies and ground into the dust the best wrestlers this land has to offer?" he demanded. "That depends," replied the mullah. "Were these other men weaker than you?" "Of course," ranted the sportsman. "They were as feeble as flies, as insignificant as the tiniest ants." "What victory is there in defeating a weaker man?" A wolf for the imam. Times were hard, and Nasrudin resolved to find a regular job. Attracted by the easy money, he decided to become an imam. Wrapping an immense turban around his head, he went in search of a mosque. Many towns and houses of worship later, he had still had no luck. Even the most remote areas turned out to have an imam already in residence. Tired and hungry, Nasrudin stopped at a tea house in a small town at the foot of the mountains. In the square opposite, an angry mob had gathered. Upon investigation, the mullah discovered that the rabble had trapped a wolf. "The animal has been attacking our goats and has caused a lot of damage," one farmer explained. "By chasing it into town, we have finally managed to corner it. We're just discussing what to do with it now." Nasrudin unravelled his turban, arranged it on the head of the trapped animal, and set it free. "What have you done?" shouted the amazed onlookers. "It has taken days to catch it." "I have sentenced it to punishment of the worst kind," replied the mullah. "Let it suffer the torment of trying to find work dressed as an imam." After your demise. The Caliph of Baghdad dreamt that his teeth would fall out and his head would lose its hair. In the morning, he summoned the court astrologer to interpret the dream. "Alas," explained the man, "it means that your wife and children will live on after your demise." Hearing this, the enraged ruler had the astrologer thrown in jail. "How would you interpret the dream?" he asked the mullah who was visiting the court. "Your Eminence," replied Nasrudin, "the dream means that you will outlive your entire family." Reassured, the Caliph handed Nasrudin a purse of gold. Allah's guest. As Nasrudin and his wife were sitting down to supper one night, someone pounded on their door. Opening it, Nasrudin saw a dervish wearing a highly coloured coat and spotless turban. "Don't just stand there," snapped the man. "I am the guest of Allah himself, and you are obliged to invite me in and provide your tastiest food and drink. Then I shall rest my head on your best pillow and sleep under your warmest blankets." "Just a minute," said the mullah, struggling into his coat. "I will take you to a place far more suitable for a holy man such as yourself." Asking the dervish to follow, he hurried to the town mosque. "I cannot stay here," said the indignant sage. "It is cold and dark, and there is nothing to eat." "Excuse me," replied Nasrudin, "but you said you were Allah's guest, and so I naturally assumed that you would be most at home in Allah's house." Allah's mercy. Nasrudin hired a porter to carry his acquisitions home from market. As the two men were climbing the rocky slope to his door, the porter slipped and rolled down the mountainside, screaming. "Thank you, Allah, for your mercy," Nasrudin called out, stretching his arms heavenwards. "How can you thank Allah for allowing a man to fall to his death?" asked his wife, who had seen the horrifying accident. "I am not thanking him for killing the porter. I am thanking him for the fact that I had not paid the unfortunate man. If I had, my money would have joined my groceries at the bottom of the ravine." Allah's words. The Shah of Iran heard that Nasrudin, a saint, was travelling through the land. He sent his scouts to locate the Blessed One and bring him to live in splendour at court. After several months, the Shah visited Nasrudin's luxurious apartments in the palace. "Tell me, O revered saint, what utterances have you heard from the lips of Allah?" "Only the last will be of interest to you, Highness. Allah has just whispered in my ear." "What does he say?" "He just told me to watch what I say so that I may remain in the paradise he has found for me." Altered circumstances. Nasrudin and a rich merchant were riding together through the desert. "Is it not so that God rewards riches with riches?" said the merchant to the mullah. "Look at my ravishing riding boots made with the best leather money can buy, and your holed and tattered sandals. Look at my jewelled turban and the rags you wear wrapped around your head. Look at my silk coat with handcrafted buttons and gold thread, and the patched cloak that hangs from your bony shoulders. Here we two are, you with a few measly possessions in your moth-eaten saddlebags, I with spices that will make princes and kings weep with pleasure. And yet we can ride together through this place, I on an Arab stallion, you scrabbling in the sand on a silly little donkey." At that moment the merchant's musings were interrupted by the arrival of a band of robbers who yanked him from the saddle, kicked and beat him to the ground, and rode off with his cargo and mount. "How extraordinary it is," mused Nasrudin, "that my circumstances have not seemed to change, but yours are dramatically altered in the space of a few minutes." This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.